All right. Hello, I'm Greg Green, and this is episode 3 of Chthonica, the show about horror fiction in all its frightful forms. My guest today is, I suspect, responsible for introducing readers to more horror writers than anyone else in the last 40 years. She's been editing science fiction, fantasy, and horror short fiction for 4 decades, from Omni Magazine in the 80s to Tor.com and its horror imprint Nightfire today. She's edited over 100 anthologies in her career, including Lovecraft's Monsters, Fearful Symmetries, Echoes, the Saga Anthology of Ghost Stories, and of course, her annual series, The Best Horror of the Year. She's won more awards than we have time to name, but they do include Lifetime Achievement Awards from both the World Fantasy Convention and the Horror Writers Association. Her new book hits shelves on September 28. It's called When Things Get Dark, Stories Inspired by Shirley Jackson. She's master editor and anthologist and empress of horror fiction, Ellen Datlow. Ellen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I know you can't see me waving.
Yes, yes.
I mean, you can, but they can't.
Well, we'll put it on YouTube, and some people will definitely see you waving, and then the podcast folks will know you are indeed waving. So yes. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for joining me today. Let's start off with your storied career. How many stories do you think you've read over the years as an editor?
Hundreds. I can't even imagine, because don't forget, every year for the best of the year, I read hundreds. So thousands.
Hundreds just for the annual best horror of the year.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I used to have an honorable mention list that was pages long in the book.
Oh, yes, I remember.
But my editors always complained that I was using all the pages for this, and I should stop. So I think I only picked the top 50 now.
Yes. Yeah.
And I have the rest in my blog. I kind of post them once a year.
Yes.
And those, don't forget, that's like a tiny percentage of what I read. That's because right. Because not everything goes on there. Only things that I actually like and think are worthwhile putting on that recommended list. Mm-hmm. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
And of course, your career is really editing short fiction.
Right. Sure.
How many novels do you get to in a year?
Not many. Okay. I mean, I think maybe I covered 10 or 15.
Oh, my goodness.
But I mean, but I mean, not necessarily covering them. I mean, I do a mini review of the things, of some of the novels in my year's best, and then some I just put as also noted. So those are not all read, but some of them are. But I'm not sure. Maybe 10.
Yes.
Let's say.
Yes.
Well, 15 the most, but that's during the year.
Yeah.
A whole year, which is not many novels, really.
I'd say for most people, maybe not Sadie Hartman, but for most people, that's probably a pretty good number of novels. Well, how long does it take once you start in on a story that's been submitted to you? How long does it take until you know this is a great story, this is worthy of an anthology? How far do you have to get in? And conversely, how long does it take to determine if a story is not high quality or it's not a fit for one of your anthologies?
Rejecting a story is much quicker than saying yes. I can tell, depending on what I'm reading for, I might realize the story is just not my cup of tea. I mean, there's certain types of stories I'm just not interested in, and I can usually tell within a page.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean the story is necessarily bad. It's just not something for me, for whatever venue I'm reading for. As far as picking a story for whatever thing I'm reading for, if it's someone who I worked with before, I can usually tell pretty quickly if I'm going to love it.
Yes.
But then you hope that they don't screw it up. Even the most expert, the people I work with, somebody says you're still hoping it's going to live up to the beginning and the middle, and it's not going to screw up the end. Yes. You know, the end is not going to screw up. And of course, I'm editing novellas now too, or acquiring some novellas for Tor.com. It's a novella program, and Nightfire program, which is their horror imprint. And that also, it's the same. I mean, if it's something that I'm reading a novella and I realize I'm not getting involved in it, if I'm not drawn in pretty quickly, I'm probably I'll realize I don't have the concentration, the focus I need right now to work on this, to read it and appreciate it, or I'll realize I just don't like it.
Yes.
You know, and that I have to make that judgment. How tired am I? It's like, you know, do I really want to read a novella like at midnight? Start a novella?
Yes.
Probably not.
Yes, yes.
But on the other hand, if it's great, I'll still be involved and, you know, want to continue reading it. And the novella program is different. I mean, I can take, for the short fiction, I can buy what I choose to without anyone's approval. For the novellas, it goes to a committee that decides whether it's going to sell or not as a book. So I may like something a lot, and then I have to, if I love it, I'll pass it on to my boss, Irene Gallo, and Lee Harris, and I'm not sure who else reads them. And, you know, maybe Davy Pillai, I guess, probably. But whoever, you know, makes the decisions for the novella program will decide whether they think it'll sell, you know,
Gotcha.
the marketing.
Yeah.
And there are things that I've liked a lot that they said no to, and that's okay. You know, you learn over the years. One thing I've learned in 40 years in the business, especially starting at Omni, you have to let go of things. You have to let go. If you can't buy a story for whatever reason, you can't agonize over it. You have to just get through it. You know, it's like, okay, I couldn't buy that. They wouldn't let me buy it for whatever reason. Just get over it. Even if it wins all the awards, then you can just bang your head against the wall, but still.
I wonder, when you look at a story, in particular for, let's say, a themed anthology, are you trying to, do you read those stories as yourself, or do you read those stories with some sort of a persona of the person you think is most interested in that particular theme? For like, I think you've got one coming up about body horror, for example.
Right.
Do you think, what does the body horror reader?
Absolutely not. Okay. No.
So it's got to impress Ellen Datlow.
It's got to impress me. And I mean, I consider myself the quote unquote ideal reader for what I'm looking for.
Yes.
And I'm not reading to please other people. I hope that other readers who will buy the book or will read the story on Tor.com will appreciate what I've chosen.
Yeah.
But I read for myself.
Yes.
Essentially.
And clearly that works because, you know, there's your name is on these anthologies as the editor, the curator, of course, in a sense. And there's even a book that you published, I think, in the last year called Edited By. And I guess it's about, you know, it's stories that you have pulled together into various anthologies over the years. So I guess that, thinking of yourself as the ideal reader is resonating with a whole lot of people, because, you know, people buy your books because you're on it.
I just want to sidetrack a little bit on that.
Yeah.
I would never have approached a publisher to do that.
Yes.
Bill Schaefer at Subterranean suggested it. I mean, to me, it's such an egotistical kind of thing. It's kind of embarrassing. I said, really? You want me to do that? Why would anyone care? Like, really? But I said, okay, if you think it'll sell, sure, I'll do it.
Yes.
Why not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was only for anthologies. It's not for any of my magazine work. I mean, that would be, I think, probably impossible, because that's too much.
Yes.
I mean, as it is, I mean, even just going through all my original, I had to rethink, you know, to make a list, like see all my original anthologies and then figure out which stories I wanted to use. Yes. And they needed to be stories, as far as I was concerned, that weren't reprinted overly much.
Gotcha.
And that I hadn't used, you know, and there are a lot of stories that I've reprinted a lot because I love them.
Yes.
And I had to try not to do that, because otherwise it would be like my other books, like the other reprint anthologies I've done for Tachyon, like Darkness, 2 Decades of Modern Horror, or Nightmares, a New Decade of Horror. I can't remember what they're called anymore. And then also the best of the best for Nightshade, my best of the year publisher. So
this little tome right here, published in, I think it was 2018. I had
to make sure it didn't take anything from my 2 Tachyon books for that.
Gotcha. And so this is really like, I think in terms of the best horror of the year series, you're working now on, what is it, volume
14? 13's coming out in November or December. I thought it was coming out December. I just looked, and it looks like it's coming out in November, but I'm not sure.
So you're already working on 14.
I'm working on, that's what I'm working on now, and I'm way behind.
Okay.
Because I've been working on another anthology.
Yes. So the best of the best horror of the year. A couple of years ago, when I wanted to like kind of dip my toes back in the water of horror fiction and figure out like who's really doing what these days, what's very contemporary. I got the audiobook version of this, and it introduced me to so many people who are now my favorite writers. I imagine you hear that a lot, though.
Sometimes.
As an anthologist.
I'm curious, how was the audio? I never listened to audio, so I have no idea how
it was a collection of many different readers. I think probably Audible took the recordings from a number of other works, would be my guess, and put it together.
Maybe, I don't know.
I remember it being.
I think that would be more difficult to do it that way. I don't know. I don't know that process.
I think it would, but I believe it was a different reader for every story. Okay. Yeah. I'd have to go back and check. It's been a while since I read it, but generally my experience with most horror audio books coming from Audible in particular, it's very good. In some cases, it's stellar. My best experience, I've mentioned this on Twitter a lot, is the Imago sequence and The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All, both by Laird Barron, those two short story collections, narrated by Ray Porter, and who is an actor, and he really digs into the stories and has different voices for the different narrators. But on the best of the best horror, yeah, it's a great collection of stories. The readers are excellent, but they're just like, it's like the bourbon of horror anthologies. It is so much good stuff from those first 10 volumes of the best of horror. But yeah, you must hear people say, man, Ellen, you have introduced me to some of my favorite authors in your anthology.
Yes, I hear that occasionally. Sure.
Okay. Good. I would hope so. Well, you've made a career in genre fiction. Much of that is horror. What drew you and what keeps you in horror?
Well, I've been reading horror since I was a kid, along with science fiction and fantasy, but I always liked horror a lot. I mean, and so it just carried on. I didn't edit much horror when I was at Omni because I wasn't supposed to be editing horror. I was supposed to be doing science fiction and some fantasy. But I have always been drawn to dark fiction. I don't know why. I mean, people say, why do you like horror? It's like, I don't know. I just love it. Yes. Why? Yes. I have to have a reason. But then I started to do more horror for Omni, but also when I started doing anthologies, I deliberately chose to try to do anthologies that wouldn't conflict with my job at Omni. So that's why I kind of got into horror because of that, partly, because it wasn't a conflict, because I wasn't supposed to be buying horror for Omni. Yes. So that's how I started being more of an editor of horror. And then Jim Frankel approached me and Terry Windling about doing a year of best fantasy and horror. I had known Jim, and I had published Blood Is Not Enough, which was my first half original, half reprint anthology on vampirism. And that was my first, that and Alien Sex were my two first like half originals, half reprint anthology. Alien Sex was science fiction, but dark. Yes. Anyway, Jim approached me and Terry about doing this fantasy and horror thing, and no one had ever done that before. No one ever has since. Wow. And to me, I said, okay, sure. It's like on this continuum from fantasy to dark fantasy to horror. Sure, I don't see why not. And we didn't read each other's stuff. I mean, she handled fantasy, I handled horror. And occasionally we picked the same story and independently of each other. And Jim told us, because we weren't looking at what we were doing. Or we'd meet and we'd say, hey, I picked that story. You should read it. I think you'll like it. And we would both comment on it. So, that's how I got into editing horror, and doing more anthologies of horror.
So, and when you would meet with your colleagues to talk about stories, were you like, down in like a dark room with candles and kind of in the basement of an old brownstone?
Carrie doesn't like horror at all. She doesn't read it all. And we only met like once a year if we were lucky. We never lived in the same. she did live in Manhattan, but I didn't know her then. She was living in Massachusetts, and then she was living in Arizona and England. So we were lucky we met once a year.
Yeah.
We'd have lunch, and that was it.
I imagine a lot of business of that kind of business stuff's happening at the occasional horror convention or
now it's different. But then there was no email. There was no email, there was no internet then when we started. So it's just, yeah, you meet each other. And Jim was our packager. I mean, he packaged the entire book. So he actually decided on the order for that, for those, for the 20, how many? Terry and I did 19 volumes, I think, or something like that, or 16 volumes. And then Gavin Grant and Kelly Link did, I think, 4 volumes with me. So I think we had 21 total. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, we didn't really confer. It was totally independent.
Huh.
And we just happened to have lunch and mentioned that, oh yeah, you know, they might want to read the story.
That must have been really interesting to work with Kelly. I imagine you worked with her very early in her career as a short story writer, maybe before really she started publishing.
I had gotten stories from her. Actually, she was friendly. I'm blanking on his name and I can see his face. She had a friend who was publishing some of her work in a small press. And he was acting as her agent, but not really. But he was sending me a couple of her stories, very early stories at Omni. And they were totally not right for Omni.
Yeah.
And I encouraged her. The first stories I bought from her were for Event Horizon, the one in a year, the website that my former colleagues from Omni and I put together for like a year and a half. And I published the Specialist Hat and Girl Detective. Those are the first things of hers I published.
Yes.
And I don't know, she had published several of the stories before that, but those are the first I published.
Yes,
So,
yes.
But again, I never, we didn't work together on the year's best. We didn't confer at all. Although Kelly liked more horror. Gavin doesn't like horror at all. Kelly likes horror, so she and I might have dovetailed a little more on our tastes.
Yes. Well, tell me, as an editor, when you're looking at various stories, what in your mind, what distinguishes a great horror writer from a good one?
It's more story by story. I mean, of course, if someone hits a home run every time, then they're probably a great horror writer.
Yeah.
But I think I would say that, I mean, I judge it by each individual story. I think there are some great stories by some writers, and there are good stories by the same writers. It's hard to have a great story each time you write something or publish something. And, my opinion is different from other people's opinion. I may think something's a great story and I love it, but other people don't even, that leaves them cold, which is always, when it is an interesting phenomenon when I buy something and I think it's going to be terrific and I hope it gets a lot of attention and no one pays attention to that story at all. Not at all. Nothing. No content at all. And yet another story that I think is okay, but not brilliant, gets a lot of attention. So, I mean, obviously a lot of this is subjective.
Yes.
I mean, yes, there are the occasional stories that hit everyone, that everyone loves this one story that, yes, it's great, it's brilliant.
Well, what are, for those stories that you would say, as an editor who's read much horror fiction, and looking at some stories too that just have received both critical and popular acclaim, what are some common attributes of those stories? What makes the story, a horror story, great? Is there a
combination? It's what makes any story great. The combination of the perfect voice, the tone, the storytelling, or rather the plotting, where it takes place, the description. I'm a very visual reader, and I see everything I read, and if I can't, I have a problem with that. And I'll probably tell you, well, do something. I can't see this. What's going on here?
Interesting.
And it's all the elements coming together perfectly, and then also for the horror aspect, a strong sense of unease and ickiness sometimes, but not always, a queasiness, but a discomfort and a dissociation from the normal, from the norm. So it's a combination of everything hitting on the right track.
Do you have a...
I think I'm mixing metaphors, but anyway.
Yeah. You caught yourself there. The editor caught herself mixing metaphors. So you're on your toes for sure. Do you have a story that just as an example, you would say, well, here's like the gold standard. This is one that meets all of these things that make a great story that you share with people.
Those are the stories that I reprint over and over again. If you find a story that I've published that I reprinted multiple times, that is a story that I personally love and think is brilliant.
And one example would be
The Sea Was What Is What Can Be by Gain Wilson, which is a takeoff on The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll.
Yes.
And first reprinted it in Blood Is Not Enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's terrific.
How many times do you think you've reprinted it?
At least 2 or 3.
Okay.
I mean, that time was the first time I reprinted. I don't even know where it was originally published. I just realized. I don't know where I'd have to look it up. I don't know where it was originally published, but I put it in Blood Is Not Enough. And I can't remember, but I know I've used it at least one other time, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is The Transfer by Ed Bryant, which is in my body horror anthology. And that was also a reprint. I don't know where that was first published, but I've reprinted that more than once, probably on sci fiction. And I think The Sea Was What Can Be. I probably reprinted on sci fiction when I was doing reprints.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is I can never remember the title. It's the one by Garth Nix. Something Corsham, Shay Corsham. It's 3 random words, which is why I can never remember it. Oh, Shay Corsham Worsted, something like that.
Yeah.
I originally published that someplace. Where did I originally publish it? It might have been in Fearful Cemeteries, but I can't swear to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No, or Inferno. It was in one of my original anthologies, and I've reprinted that multiple times. And they just hit me the right way. I'm trying to think of others. Offhand, I can't, but I mean, there are plenty of others.
No, that's a great list there. Just thinking about your relationship or your interest in horror, do you enjoy horror in any other medium? Movies, comics, poetry, music, theater? I mean, you've got Sweeney Todd and The Woman in Black.
I like Sweeney Todd. I mean, I never liked Women in Black. I always thought it was very stereotypical. It just kind of like was obvious to me.
Yeah.
But I love Sweeney Todd. I've seen it multiple times.
Wow.
I think it's terrific. I don't go to that many horror movies. I'm very picky on my horror.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw the car. On the other hand, when I watched The Thing, the original one.
Yes.
When I watched it, we had 3 or 4 TV stations. One of them was 11 and one was 9, 11, and 13. 13 didn't exist really, but there was 9 and 11. And I watched, it was on probably $1 Million Movie, which was I think on Channel 9. And it was always fuzzy. So, and I assumed it was the bad connection because that was on Channel 9 or 11 or whatever. And then I actually saw a print of it. I actually went to Film Forum and they had, brand new print of it. And it was fuzzy. That was how it was made.
Oh, wow.
So it was very
The John Carpenter version.
No, the original one.
Oh, the original black and white, right?
With James Arness as a carrot. Yes.
Yes. I gotcha.
No, I meant the original one. No, but when I saw the John Carpenter one, I saw that in a preview at a small screening room. I have not been able to watch that one again. I thought it was fabulous. I think it's brilliant, but I keep wanting to watch it again, and I can't bring myself to do it. One of these years I will, because it was so horrifying to me.
Okay, gotcha.
The mutilation, I mean, it was just so appalling. It was so hard to watch.
Yes.
That it's hard for me to decide to actually watch it again.
Because it's so gruesome and it's frightening and all, but is there any concern that it won't live up to your memory?
Oh, absolutely not. I'm sure it will.
Okay.
Oh, I know it will. In fact, I read an article about it. I can't remember, probably Crime Reads or, some, I don't know where exactly. I mean, there was exegesis of it, and it made me want to watch it again, but I'm not sure I can bear it.
Yes. Well, I'm in a lot of the horror film circles on Twitter in particular, and it's just up there at the number 1, number 2, number 3 on everybody's list.
Sure.
I think it's held up very well.
I watched Alien several times, and each time it gets me, but I love it.
It's like Alien, Exorcist, and The Thing and The Shining tend to be at that top.
I hated
top 3, 4.
I hated
Really?
He ruined it. Kubrick ruined it
because you were already bought in.
I read the book. Well, okay. I read the novel, and he changed it drastically in
Yes.
ways, and I hated what he did with it. I thought he basically killed a character off who was a hero in the book, and I really resent that.
What about the Dr. Sleep?
And also the other thing about that is that it wasn't, maybe they couldn't do it then because they didn't have the right CGI or something, but instead of a topiary, he made a maze, or was it the vice versa? I can't remember.
But it was a maze. Yeah, he had a maze.
In the movie or in the book?
In the movie, it's a maze.
On the book, it was a topiary, which was much better.
Interesting. So. Have you seen Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep? Because he wrestles in the movie Dr. Sleep, he wrestles with the novel of The Shining and the novel of Dr. Sleep. And he also I think Flanagan is trying to address people who love the novel and people who love the movie. It's very interesting.
Well, I haven't read the book Dr. Sleep. Does it matter? Seeing the movie?
I haven't read the novel, so I'm not sure. But I thought the movie.
Then it doesn't matter if you think the movie works without having read the novel.
Yeah, I think the movie works.
There are other horror movies I like. The Babadook. I like. Personal Shopper is terrific.
The Kristen Stewart film.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
I actually liked. Oh God, the one with Casey Affleck as a ghost with the sheet over his head. It's not Ghost Story, but it's Ghost something or other.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It is really weird. And it does kind of work, I think. I mean, shockingly. Did you ever see that? Do you know what I'm talking
I know what you're talking about, but I haven't seen it.
I mean, it's weird. It's weird, and it almost doesn't work, but I think it almost does work.
Yes.
Because the ghost doesn't say a word. And all it does is wander around sad about not being with his family anymore.
Interesting.
So I mean, it's not horror, but it's very weird.
yes the weird cinema contingent there. Well, let's talk about your book, When Things Get Dark. I assume the title is a reference to one of Shirley Jackson's stories. Is that right?
Well, that is weird, because when you asked that, I was like, I don't remember. I don't know where it came up, but I looked up my emails.
Yes.
And because we were wrestling with titles. Yeah. And what I discovered was that I wrote to my editor, we were wrestling with titles. What I wrote, literally, a writer friend of mine recommended this title. It was from an essay by Jackson. I do not remember who told me this. I am trying to figure out. I have no idea who told me, who gave me the name.
Okay, so friend, if you recommended this to Ellen, reach out to her.
Yeah, it's probably too late for me to put you in the acknowledgments, but I feel really bad, and I'll give you credit verbally if you can tell. I've asked a couple of friends who I thought it might be, but so far it's like, nope, I didn't give you that. It's like, well, who gave me the title? But anyway, so it's from an essay she wrote. Apparently. Nice.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about Shirley Jackson, and in particular, what did she bring to the horror genre? And how did she push or change or evolve the craft?
Well, I think partly, first of all, of course, The Lottery was published in the New Yorker magazine, and got the most negative mail than any other piece of fiction that they ever published got.
Oh, wow.
And don't forget, okay, so here it is, published in this mainstream magazine. I don't know what they published before, if they published much fantasy or anything before that. Maybe they did. I don't remember what date it was published. But here it was, this story that starts in a normal town, a small town in the United States. And it's very short, and very gradually it evolves into this horror story.
Yes.
Into this climactic, horrific event. So just inserting the weird, the horrific into the everyday is what she did, with that story anyway, and with other stories, with An Ordinary Day of Peanuts. And those are the stories that I'm most familiar with and most care about. And,
that's interesting. She got so much bad. The New Yorker got so much negative response to it. It seems like it falls into that vein of sort of Main Street dystopia that, like, Fahrenheit 451 was in. Why do you think that?
Because it's showing that regular people are horrible.
Wow. Yeah.
Because regular people in a small town are monsters. That's why.
Yeah.
I mean, people like to think of themselves as good people. And I'm sure those people in that story consider themselves wonderful people. And here they are stoning someone to death, you know, because it's a ritual they don't even remember. So so I can see why everyone got pissed off. They weren't expecting a horror story anyway. I mean, I'm just starting. I read her biography, which was really interesting, by Franklin, but right now I just started reading her letters. You know, I haven't gotten very far yet, but I'm really interested to see. There's a whole book of letters that she wrote to various people. None of the letters that she received, but all hers, to her future husband. I mean, the first one was when she was like 17 or 18, and they weren't married yet, her and Stanley. And I forget what my point was, but anyway, she was interesting because she was this supposedly quote unquote normal housewife. I mean, of course, that's not what she was. I mean, she was kind of pushed into this, you know, this little pigeonhole by outsiders, but she was not. You know, she wrote some wonderful nonfiction books that I read, and one of them might have been filmed, "A Life Among the Savages," which is about her household, and a lot of them, you know, they're just telling stories about her and her family. She had like 4 kids, I think. Stanley, her husband, was unfaithful throughout their marriage, throughout their relationship. He was a professor, and she respected him, and he was, from the biography, it's hard to say how much he helped or hindered her. I think he encouraged her to some extent. She was not your normal quote unquote housewife. And the family was, when they were in Bennington, they lived a lot of places, but they were mostly in Bennington where Stanley taught. And one of their guests, regularly, a close friend, was Ralph Ellison.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember if he actually wrote some of the book at their place, but he definitely visited a lot, and they were good friends. And there were probably a lot of other intellectuals who came to visit. You know, but Stanley was considered the intellectual and, you know, brilliant. You know, I'm sure she considered him brilliant. And but her influence was that she injected the weird, not always. I mean, she did mainstream novels too, but she injected the weird into everyday life. And that was something that wasn't done much before that. I mean, I'm not a historian. I'm not, you know, I don't know enough about the history of literature of England to know how many other people did that in the United States or in England. And I don't know other early cultural traditions either in literature, so I can't judge that. But I believe in the States anyway, she was, you know, a person who did that.
Well, this table of contents is amazing. The authors here, M. Rickert, Elizabeth Hand, I think is it Sheenan McGuire?
Seanan
McGuire, Carmen Maria Machado, Cassandra Caw, John Langan, Karen, I assume it's Hewler, is that right? Karen Hewler, who has a Money of the Dead, one of my favorites in here, Benjamin Percy, Joyce Carol Oates, Richard Kadrey, Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, Jeffrey Ford, Gemma Files, Josh Mallerman, Genevieve Valentine, Laird Barron, and Kelly Link. I mean, it's you must be living right, Ellen. Because
I have a lot of connections. What can I say?
That's an amazing collection.
I mean, most of the people I've worked with before, if not all of them. I mean, even if, I've actually, Benjamin Percy, that was the first time I ever bought anything by him. I don't think I ever reprinted anything of his near his best.
Why these authors for this anthology? What was your selection criteria?
Well, first of all, I asked people if they were influenced by Shirley Jackson. And that was my big question, because it turned out, you know, a couple of people I asked who I thought would have said, of course. No, I wasn't, you know, I never read her, or I was never influenced her by her. It's like, okay. I mean, there were people who I thought some of their writing might have felt like their writing was influenced, like certainly Kelly. Kelly Link and Carmen Maria Machado, maybe. And Karen Hewler. And actually Mary Rickert too. So, I mean, some of the people it seemed, some of the writers, it seemed obvious to me that they seemed, I mean, you know, you may think someone's influenced by them and they may say, well, I never read that person. So, but it felt like they were in the same, overall tone of Jackson's work.
Kind of the same vibe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that. I mean, it seems like even if any given author of horror fiction today hasn't read Shirley Jackson, they read people who were influenced by her. It seems like just with her prominence on the literary scene, that would be hard to not be influenced by her.
Well, you never know, because I mean, I assume that everybody has heard of her.
Yeah.
In and outside of literature. Okay. Yeah. I just assumed everyone, we were all made to read The Lottery when we were kids, right? Yeah. I mean, a certain age. I mean,
it's one of the most reprinted short stories, right?
So I assumed that everyone has heard of Shirley Jackson and knows at least of The Lottery and The Haunting of Hill House, which was made into multiple movies. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
I recently met up with an old friend of mine who's not in the field and mentioned I was doing this book. And he had no idea. He told, I still can't believe it. He told me he didn't know who Shirley Jackson was. No, he never read The Lottery. I said, how? And he went to an Ivy League college.
Oh, wow.
Name of which one? Brown, I think. And I said, how could you not have heard of Shirley Jackson? You never heard of The Haunting of Hill House? Or The Haunting, the movie? You never read The Lottery? And he claims no. And I said, I don't believe you. You know, I mean, seriously, I don't believe him. And he was going to visit some friends upstate. I said, ask them if they, if they don't know who she is, then I'll eat my proverbial hat. But I just don't believe it. So what do I know? You know, so I was like, you don't know who's influenced by other writers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I think being in, and just an aside, being in the literary field, we assume that everyone out there who does, oops, I just hit my lamp, who isn't in genre is still aware. Some people never read Stephen King. Yeah. And I can't believe people have not heard of him, though. I would be shocked if people hadn't heard of him. Yeah. But there are writers who we think of as prominent and well-known in our field, who other people who don't read have never heard of them. Yeah. Because they don't read at all.
Yeah, yeah. But it does seem, well, Stephen King's a good example because of his prominence in so many forms of popular culture.
Right, sure.
The movies in particular, but also comic books and audiobooks and there's nonfiction as well. He's so well represented. But Shirley Jackson also just seems like, a pretty pervasive. Not that's doesn't sound right, but you know, she's just, it seems like her legacy is just so strong. Well, this volume is a tribute anthology, and right on the cover it says these are stories inspired by Shirley Jackson. Tell me, what does that inspired by mean to you? Is it pastiche? Is it something else?
Absolutely not pastiche. No, I hate pastiches.
Tell me what. First, tell us what pastiche is, and then
pastiche is, to me, it's a slavishly imitating a writer. That's what a pastiche is, and not coming up with anything new, but just using all their tropes, all their language and everything. You know, there are lots of Lovecraftian pastiches. I have edited 2 original, or 3, Lovecraftian anthologies that are influenced by Lovecraft, but are not pastiches. You know, I don't like pastiches. I have no interest in them. When I do an anthology like this, I want to push the writers to write something that they think gives the flavor of Jackson, for example, either in tone or in characterization. A lot of her work was about domesticity and took place around families. And some of them are, a lot of the work is from small towns. And so, you know, when I got people to write, there basically was wide open to how they wanted to approach it. You know, and I did a Poe anthology, and for that, I wanted to make sure I had enough variety. So I actually told people to tell me what exactly from Poe are you being influenced by? What story, what poem, what article? So I didn't get, I mean, I did get 3 House of Usher stories, but they were very different. Mask of the Red Death, but they were totally different from each other. And I knew they would, because of the writers. And I didn't have to do that with Jackson. I mean, because her stories aren't that well known except for the lottery, really. The individual stories. So it's not like I said, oh, so what story are you going to take on? Because it's not what I wanted. And so I got an interesting collection of stories, an anthology of stories that about domestic relationships, about small town hate. About monstrousness among normal people.
Well, one thing that struck me was just her obsession with place, especially with houses. She describes the live description of the place where she is, whether it's the small town or especially the inside of the house, as well as the inner world of the protagonist. So I kind of think of her works as horror of the interior.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But tell us about maybe 1 or 2 of Shirley's distinct writing styles or techniques or tropes, and maybe give us an example of how they're reflected in a story in your collection.
Well, okay, Josh Malaman's story Special Meal is about a family sitting around a table and something's going on, and very quickly you realize that people are not supposed to use math or I don't remember why. I mean, I can't remember what. You
never find out. You never know. You never find out why. Okay. Yeah. There's one little hint as to why, but it's very mysterious.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of Jackson's charm, because you usually don't find out why something is happening. With the lottery, it's a ritual and it's been going on for decades or hundreds of years, but there's no reason why.
Yeah.
And this in Special Meal is kind of like that. In the Special Meal, the children are being tested on their non-knowledge.
Yes.
And their non-use of math. If they use math, they get taken away and no one knows exactly what happens to them.
And they're trying to be tricked by the investigators who come in.
Yes, the investigators are trying to trick them.
It's a horrific story. I mean, again, it's
a wonderful
story. Dystopia. Yeah. It's tense from the very beginning.
Yeah, and to me, it feels very much like a Jackson story. Yeah. And then there's Funeral Birds by Mary Rick, which I started with. Hers, that's a very Jacksonian story about someone who goes to a funeral, and goes to funerals, and you gradually find out what's going on. I mean,
she's a home healthcare worker,
right?
Like one of the most important, one of the noblest.
Caretaker for old people. Sure.
Yeah. You're caring for people at the end of their lives. How noble that is. But then you start getting the sense it doesn't take too long.
But I mean, it starts off, you don't even know who she is. She's going to a funeral, and and then you find out, okay, she was caring for this woman, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that, to me, and the description, I mean, you asked me if I wanted to read something from
a short passage.
I mean, I would just like to read just the first few lines from that story, the opening, because it just feels like Jackson to me. Okay, I'm just going to read like a few lines.
Yes.
This is Funeral Birds by M. Rickert. Lenore had carefully chosen what to wear, but felt dissatisfied. She always wanted to be a woman who appeared chic and vaguely kick-ass in black, when in fact she looked like a half-plucked crow. She reached back to pull down the difficult zipper then drew, I didn't read this ahead of time. She reached back to pull down the difficult zipper, then drew the dress overhead, momentarily trapped, inhaling the unpleasant scent of her body odor until, with a gasp, she was free. Her hair risen in static revolt as she spun on her stockinged feet to the closet. Panic rising, she reached for the hibiscus dress, but what would they think about a woman who arrived late to a funeral in luau attire? She chose the periwinkle instead.
Nice.
I mean, saying that, except for the kick-ass, it sounds like Jackson.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I don't want people to slavishly copy her, and I don't think they did, but it still has that essence of Jackson there.
And so you don't want them to slavishly, kind of mimic her, but do you think any of the stories in this collection would come close enough to her style that they would actually fool somebody who was like a fan, but not necessarily a scholar where they know every single thing that she writes. Some anachronisms like cell phones notwithstanding.
Right.
The Funeral Birds, I actually thought, just from what Jackson I've read, it
except for that one, the Kick-Ass. I don't think she would say Kick-Ass.
She also, I think she's playing blasting Van Halen in her car when she shows up outside the church. Yeah,
but I do actually, I think that one is almost the most to me.
Yeah,
and the John Langan a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's the shortest thing I've ever gotten from John. It's really short.
Yeah, that's called Like Living Creatures, I think it is.
Something Like Living Creatures.
Yeah, Something Like Living Creatures.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very strange little short story. I need to go back and reread it because I think something's going on that I'm not quite. I see what's going on at the end. That's pretty clear, but there are references going on at the beginning between like three sisters before their mother comes out of her room. Some interesting apocalyptic visions going on there. So what do you hope to accomplish with this book?
Well, it's the same thing I have hoped to accomplish with every anthology I do. I just hope that people read it and it'll sell. Yeah. I just hope people, I mean, secondarily, I hope it'll make people read more Jackson. Yes. But that's not why. I did it because I thought it'd be fun and because I love the work, and I thought, I got to get people to, I'm always happy to just be able to acquire, solicit more new stories from people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you've got a terrific collection here, and I've really enjoyed reading through this. So many, just fantastic authors here, and some stories that really surprised me. I was not familiar with Karen Hewler. Her story, Money of the Dead, was just such a very dark, kind of goes into it's without giving away any.
It's like a monkey's paw kind of thing.
It's monkey's paw. It's like,
it's not, but you could compare it to that slightly.
It's real similar to that. But it takes an interesting kind of has an interesting evolution at the end. Paul Tremblay with The Party, he has one called The Party, and it seems very much like a Shirley Jackson story, and also has kind of Paul's classic ambiguous ending, though I think it's pretty clear what's going on. I'm not sure that one of the two main characters really knows what's going on and how much danger I think she's in, but that's really cool. Refinery Road by Stephen Graham Jones, some really interesting kind of.
I wouldn't think that he would do that, he would be able to do it, but he did. But Stephen can do anything.
Oh, he's terrific. And the stories go, most of them are in the supernatural territory. There's a lot of ghosts in here, but Joyce Carol Oates' story, Take Me, I Am Free, is. There's nothing supernatural in that I found. No. It's just
a real bummer. It's just really sad and tragic and horrible.
It is. And it's about, it's just like what you said. We like to think of ourselves as generally being good people, but here you've got a parent-child relationship, and it's a really, people are terrible to each other. Is this point of that? Yeah, it's a terribly, terribly sad story.
I see that not all the stories are horror by any means, but a couple are really horrific. Like the most horrific to me is the Laird Baron.
Yeah.
I think that's one of Laird's creepiest story in ages.
My response to that, and I'm like the world's biggest Laird Baron fan. My response to that story was, oh, well, that doesn't seem right. And then at the end, it was like, oh no.
Yeah, right.
Now it actually made me think I might have nightmares. I never worried about reading a scary story and having nightmares. I thought I might have one after this. No, it is very creepy. It does remind me a lot of in a canyon, in a cavern. It's that sort of just like gradual. It's
and gradual unfolding of the truth, which is hideous.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But the final image really was just like, oh no, it was a jaw-dropping kind of moment for me. It's really, really creepy. Laird did a terrific job with that. Well, I went out on Reddit and I asked some folks out there in the horror and weird lit space if they had questions for celebrated anthologist Ellen Datlow. And here we got a bunch of questions actually. Here's some questions from the Chthonica listener Mailbag. Me Again writes about anthologizing here. A few questions about that. He or she writes, I'm curious about the process of creating an anthology. It may be hard to generalize, but how long does it take? Does the publisher look for someone to edit an anthology for some niche, or do you, an anthologist, pitch ideas to the publishers? And then what's the ratio of stories that are considered to those that are actually selected? Any thoughts on that?
Okay. First of all, most anthologies I pitch. You pitch to the publisher. It depends on the kind of anthology it is. Like the reprint anthology that I do with Tachyon, Jacob Weissman, who's the publisher, and I discuss what might be a good theme, but that's wholly different than original anthologies. It's more, I know he always wants something pretty broad. And so we have to figure out, okay, what do you think is broad enough, and am I interested in it? Because the thing about how long does an anthology take?
Yes.
From the time of when you pitch it to the time it comes out is at least 2 years, at least, because
even for an annual serial.
Well, for a reprint anthology, it doesn't have to be as long, okay. But for an original one, it does, because you have to wait for the stories to come in.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, for a reprint anthology, it probably doesn't take that long. Although I still have to go through, for the ones I do for Tachyon, it's like I have to go out and think about possible stories, and then go contact a bunch of writers and say, would you have a story on this theme that I might like, send me a few, blah, blah, blah. But for an original anthology, before I sell it, I'll go to some, if I have an idea that I really like, I may go to some authors and say, if I do this anthology, are you interested?
Yes.
Because that way I can give some names to the publisher and say, I think I can get these people. You can't guarantee anyone, because, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And the one person I don't try not to do that with anymore is Joyce Carol Oates, because if I ask her for a story, for a theme, she'll write it immediately, and I haven't sold it yet. And then, at least once I couldn't sell it, and I said, I can't do anything with it. I don't want to hold it up anymore. Just sell it someplace else.
Yes.
So someone like that, who is either, yes, I'm in, I like that idea, I'm going to do it right now. It's like, don't do it,
Wow.
So I don't ask her right away.
Yes.
But if I pitch the anthology, or it depends on whether I know the publisher or not. I might do it personally, or else my agent will send it out. And once they say, yeah, I like that, sometimes they'll say, well, we need a certain number of best-selling writers, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, well, I think I can get these people, but that's it. And but by the time we sign a contract, then I have to contact the writers who I'm interested in. And I'll say, okay, here's the theme, here's the guidelines, this is what I'm paying. I don't want anything longer than this. I don't want this kind of story, or I do want this kind of story. And you have like 9 months to write it, or a year, or whatever it is, or 8 months, but no less than that.
Yeah.
And then periodically I will go back to them and say, how's it coming? I have to say, the one anthology that I am just finished, which is a monster anthology and very large, for Nightfire, was one of the hardest ones I've ever done, because I don't know what happened, if people just got burned out, but a lot of people were late. I mean, everyone, I didn't get the last 5 or 6 stories until like 2 weeks before the book was due, which was bad. Well, not that many, but at least 3 or 4 that I was counting on.
Was that a pandemic related effect, you think?
Who knows? I don't know. Just whatever, stress, maybe.
Yes.
I don't know. But the thing is, I'll get the stories in, and I solicit stories from writers who I work with usually, or writers who I think might be interested and might be interesting to try to get into a book.
Yes.
I don't have open markets generally, so I don't get like a lot of submissions from people who I don't know. But I'll read the stories, and I will know. Some editors, I guess, wait until all the stories come in to make decisions. I don't do that. I buy stories as I like them, as they come in. Either I buy them or reject them. Some I'll get asked for rewrites, and I won't commit to buying it until I get the rewrites, depending on how much rewriting it needs. And then even when I accept everything, then I go back and I do a line right a few months before. I try to do it. This was what happened like the last week before my book was due, which was due September 1st. I was line editing 3 stories, including novella, because I just, because they were late.
Yes.
I actually, what I do is the line edit is something that I do. I do in the order of when I buy the stories. So the oldest stories get line edited first because that gives me a fresh eye almost if I haven't seen the story for like 8 months.
That's right. Yes.
So I'll start with the ones I bought first and go and line edit. And the line edit is just a very, very focused line by line edit, which can be extensive. Usually a lot of little things. And that I do for every story. So
is that line edit the same thing as proofreading, or is that a different process?
No, not at all. No, proofreading has nothing to do with editing. I mean, it's going over proofs. I mean, it's looking to see. Proofreading was originally meant to you go over the proofs, you compare it to the original. But I don't know how proofreading is done now. It's maybe different, and it's different from copy editing. Line editing can include some copy edits. If I catch something, I will point it out. If I catch misspellings, I just fix them. If they're obvious. I mean, punctuation, I'll probably tell the author, depending on how sensitive they are to certain things.
Yes.
But I may ask people to say, too many commas here. Can you put in more of a pause, either a semicolon or a dash?
Yes.
Yeah. Or that's when I also notice that people are overusing words or phrases in their story. And I said, take out the 100 that's in here.
Yeah.
the stills, the just, the that's, the buts,
Yes.
whatever. Once that I see it, I can't unsee it, and they just jump out at me. And then you can look on the computer, say, oh yeah, there are 50 buts here in 20 pages. Get rid of half of them if you can.
Wow.
But I also want, I said you have to show me everything you've done. I want it either in red or in track changes, but I need to see everything. Used to have paper, you could compare things line by line, but with computer, it just doesn't line up. It's a pain in the ass. Yeah. So I have to see and no matter how many times I tell my authors and how many times I've worked with them, some of them still don't do what I asked them to do.
Wow.
I said, you didn't mark what you changed. I have no idea what you took out. Thanks a lot. And I put in big type, I say, I need to see what you've done, whether you're taking something out or adding it. I don't care. I want to see the cross outs. And they still don't pay it. Some of them don't.
So it sounds like overall, the process of editing is there's the selection, procurement process at the beginning. Hey, this is a good story. This is going to fit the theme. This is quality enough.
And then we still need to work on it, but we need some work on it before I buy it, or even, I'll usually have questions. I mean, some stories are very clean. I mean, it's very seldom. I don't think there, like in my whole career, I think I've come across maybe 3 stories in my entire career that didn't need any editing.
Wow.
And that's, but you expect, that's a shock.
Yes.
Because it's very unusual that an author is like, everything is exactly right. And I don't know if that answered the whole
thing. It answered that question. Part of me again's question also was what ratio of stories are considered to,
well, that doesn't happen that much. Well, unless they do a reprint anthology, it's irrelevant because I don't.
Right. You're really going out and commissioning stories.
Well, but I do. Well, not exactly commissioning because I'm not required to buy them. If you're actually commissioning something, you usually have to pay a kill fee.
Yeah.
I'm soliciting them. And it's on the understanding that I may not take the story. I turned down a few stories for whatever reason. They didn't work or they didn't work for the anthology. And then I usually ask about a third more than I need for originally because people drop out. That just happens.
Well, have you, and this is a question from Trashboat77, have you ever just decided to include 1 or more extra stories despite an initial hard number that you knew you're going to do 10 stories in an anthology?
Once in a while. I mean, very seldom. I mean, I know how much it goes by wordage, not how many stories. At least I go by wordage. It's like, this anthology is supposed to be 120,000 words or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I may, with an anthology that Terry Winling and I did, and I think it was Queen Victoria's Book of Spells, a few stories came in late and they were really, really good, but we couldn't take them. There just was no room and they came in too late.
Yeah.
And it was sad because we would have taken a couple of them if we could have. Usually, once in a while, I was like, I'll have everything done Actually, it happens more in the year's best because I'm constantly reading that until I hand in the book.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, I'll find a last minute story that I really love, and I'll say, "That's like I'm putting this in. I'm putting this in. I'm squeezing this in." But other than that, no, not really. I mean, as long as people get their stories in on time.
But Trashboat77 also asks, do you have a favorite among the many collections and anthologies you've edited?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some favorites, Fearful Symmetries. I love my non-theme anthologies. I love the dark. I really loved doing Supernatural Noir. I would actually like to do another one. Poe. So yeah, I have some favorites.
Cool, very good. Sarnath asks, how do you approach the inclusion of up-and-coming authors, those lesser-known writers, when you create an anthology?
Well, because I read for the year's best every year and have been doing it for 30, I don't know how many, 30 years or so.
Yes.
I have my antenna does kind of see what's going on in the field and who's new and who is interesting. And I may contact some of those people once in a while for an original anthology I'm doing. It's more likely to get into a reprint anthology because I'll be aware of the story and I'll say, okay, I really like that story by that person. I think I can take this for my reprint anthology. And then at some point I may say, okay, I'd like to see a story from you. And either I will take it or I will not.
But there's not like some kind of percentage, like we've got to have 50% well-known authors and then the rest.
No, and I don't. What's really interesting to me over time, when I started doing the year's best, I published very few women writers. There just weren't that many compared to the male writers in horror in 1987 or whenever I started doing it. And over time, it's changed. The percentage changed, and it's almost parity now. But what really interested me, and the thing is, when I'm soliciting for original anthology, I don't at all consciously think about it. I mean, I know I have my favorite writers. I'll say, oh, yeah, please write for me. But it turns out that the one I just finished, the monster anthology, I think it's actually half and half, exactly. It can't be. I think it's 29 stories. So I think it's like one more male than female, but it's like shocking to me because I did not plan it that way. And I'm really glad. Not that
Interesting. Yes.
So I'm glad my subconscious is working better than my conscious.
Vanilla Bear 11 asks, is there a formula for determining the order of stories as they're placed in an anthology?
Mostly just the first and last.
Okay.
The first one, you try to do one that's easily accessible to the reader, that invites them into the anthology, that is not too weird, not too complicated, not a weird structure, that will kind of give them an idea of what the anthology is about.
Yes.
It should be strong. It may not be what you consider the strongest story, but it's a strong story and it attracts the reader. Okay. The last story is usually what you think is the strongest story and or the longest story. Well, not always, but usually the longest story will go last. Or will go next to last because maybe you'll have the longest story next to last and then you'll have what I call like a grace note of a popping, a shorter story that's really strong, pops. And the rest of it is less important, but what I find is the longer my anthologies are, the harder it is to juggle the order.
Yes.
Now, usually I have like 20 stories in a regular anthology. When I have more than that, it becomes more difficult. Like with Monsters, I had 29, and it becomes really, really difficult, partly because I can't remember all the stories without looking at the beginning of them And what I'm trying to do is put them in an order of type of story as far as tone and length and maybe point of view. Like I just, at the last minute, I had posted my table of contents for the Monster Anthology. And then I realized when I was I created the table of contents, moved everything around. And then I had to put everything in a full manuscript file. I mean, I put it all in one file. And as I was doing that, I realized that two stories I had next to each other, even though most of the stories were totally different, but the endings felt too similar.
Interesting.
And suddenly I said, oh shit. Oops,
Yeah. That's
I have
funny.
to move that story. And I
Yes.
did. I moved it farther away. And so then I changed the table of contents, but what I had announced was one thing. And I said, oh boy, I just moved this.
Yes.
It
Yes.
just didn't feel right. It just felt like, oh, the endings are too similar, even though the rest of the story is not.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, so there are a whole bit of things to juggle. If you have really weird stories, you put them later. So people are used to are used to the book.
Right.
And then they may not be freaked out by something really weird. They may hate it also. But
And when you say weird, do you mean like the content is just like, oh my gosh, this image the guys come up with?
It can be that or the structure or whatever.
The structure. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, like Livia Llewellyn has twice sent me stories that have odd structure.
Yes.
With they're both Cthulhu stories kind of, and they have just odd structure, right? And one was I forget which anthology it was, but I put that was one that I definitely put someplace in the middle, or put farther enough back so that people were used to reading.
Yeah, I'm guessing Alakthon in the best of the best horror.
No, it was an original. No, it was an original story.
Oh, okay.
And a crown of something, I think.
Bright Crown of Joy.
Yeah, I think maybe. And I can't remember what anthology of mine that was in. I think that was it. But anyway, the current one, the one that she was I shouldn't say she was last this time. I mean, in the sense that her story came in last.
Yes.
But that's okay. She did it. And anyway, but
I'm so excited.
But it also had a very weird story. And it has this weird structure where someone's like having what do you call it? Oh, stream of consciousness and all this stuff. Yes. So you can't put that at the beginning because you just read her completely. I don't remember where I put it, but I'm sure I put it someplace later on.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So, so there are a whole bunch of things you consider when you're doing it.
Yeah. So let people, it sounds like.
What you cannot consider is that people read your anthology in whatever order they feel like.
That's true.
Because you can't do that. I mean, as an editor, I have to assume they're going to read it front to back.
Yes.
If they don't, that's their thing.
Yes. Well, I try to do that because it's like listening to an album, right?
It isn't though. I mean, it isn't. I mean, when people say, oh, I love the order of these stories, to me, it's partially throwing them up like 52 pickup.
Wow.
I mean, it's the juggling. It's like, oh, I'm glad you think so. Yes, I tried, but I don't know what I was doing.
Yes.
I'm glad that it worked. I'm glad that it worked. That's all I can say.
Absolutely. It does make sense though. Like maybe if you have something that's extremely intense, you want something maybe a little bit lighter next to alleviate some of the tension.
And yes, I tried to do that. Okay, these stories are really depressing and they're both about children dying.
Yes,
so I want them near each other. They're very different stories, but they need to be moved around. And then you need something with more energy here and like calmer here. So yeah, it's something you just figure out as you're doing it.
Yes. Next question, Empage asks, have you ever had a publisher turn down a story you selected for being too long, too graphic, etc.?
I had one bad experience with a publisher. Terry and I did a book that was a YA book that was bought by the head of the company or the head publisher or whatever, and handed to one of the editors to edit when we handed it in. Unfortunately, that editor left and we were given to a junior editor who obviously had never edited an anthology before, knew nothing about what we were doing, didn't know anything about short stories.
Wow.
And she proceeded to say, you should cut this story. I don't understand this story. Why is it here? You should rewrite this. And basically, we got our agent to read her the Riot Act. We said, well, just pulling the anthology. We're not doing it.
Wow.
We're not doing this.
Yeah.
And so our agent read the publisher the Riot Act and they backed down.
Huh.
I mean, well, I mean, if you're hiring me and Terry, who have 50 years between us, maybe of edit, you either trust us or you don't hire us to do it.
Yes.
That's what we do. This is our living.
Yeah.
And I would not accept that from anybody. I mean, now I will accept if someone, the first story, I have my idea what a first story should be. And at one point, one of my editors thought that story shouldn't be first. And so we decided another one, and that was okay. I understood why, and it was all right. I agreed, that's fine. Another time someone wanted a story first because it was a big name. I said, that's a really stupid reason to put the story first. No, and that story doesn't belong first.
The name can still be on the cover and the story not be first.
It's just like, no, that story is not a first story.
Wow. Wow.
And it's like someone, I don't remember, I remember the author, but I don't remember the anthology or who the editor was, but they just kind of missed the whole point of editing anthologies.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. All right.
Once I'm notoriously bad at counting numbers. Well, now that you have word counts for you, you go by that, and that's the way it goes. But when you had to do it, 500 words per page. But when I did that, I was so bad at it. And I remember for one of the year's best, I took the Ballad of
Peter Straub.
The
Ballad of Ballard and
Sandrine, Ballard of Sandrine.
Yeah.
Which was an enormous novella.
Yeah.
That I discounted.
Oh, wow.
As shorter than it was.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm taking that. And then it turned out it was so big. I actually had to cut out 2 other stories.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
One was by someone I didn't know. It was foreign. It was no big deal. I don't think I bought it yet. And the other one was, I have to say, it was Dallas Mayor, Jack Ketchum, and he was darling about it. He was so about it. And I couldn't believe I fucked up so bad. And he was great. I mean, we were friends, all along until he died. So I was like, oh my God, what did I do?
But don't they hire you for the words, not the numbers? I mean, isn't that always the division?
No, if the book is too big, it's going to cost more.
Yes, yes.
I mean, I had an assignment to do a book at a certain length. And yes, you can go over a little bit, but because I miscounted, it was a lot.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that was a horrifying story. Very, very disturbing.
A great story.
Yeah, absolutely.
That book, is that the one that has Stephen King in it too? Because that book has sold the best of any of my year's best. I think it sold a lot.
The best of the best one?
No. It wasn't in there, was it? The best. I reprinted it in there, really?
You did. The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine.
Okay, well, I was able to fit it in there, but it was originally in one of my best of the year.
Gotcha.
I think. So no, I was able to fit it in there.
Cool.
With problems.
It's absolutely just creepy. Okay, next question. Birds Books asks, when you commission stories for a collection, how often do you have to reject what the authors submit, and how do those conversations go?
Well, we're talking about I solicit stories, and I would say that usually when I turn down a story, the author knows that it's going to be. I have found that they know that it wasn't quite on the right track.
Okay.
So it's not a shock. At least they don't profess shock to me.
Yes.
It doesn't happen very often because I solicit from writers who I know I'm pretty sure I can count on.
Yes.
And which is why I do that. And you just hope that they work out. And if it doesn't, then you have to tell the writer that it doesn't quite work. It's wrong for the anthology. Or yes, it's like, now that I have 150,000 words, yes, another 20,000 words is not going to work.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, John Langan is always late and always long, but he wasn't late this time, but he was long. It's 21,000 words or 20,000.
Oh, wow. For the monster anthology?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Called, Screams from the Dark.
Yes. Well, I'm gonna bring that up at the end as well. So let's talk a little bit more about just kind of the weird work of working with writers of the weird. Aleatoric Consonants asks, have you ever done the equivalent of rejecting the unknown J.K. Rowling with her Harry Potter manuscript? You ever had one that you've turned down that you regret later?
There are stories that I've turned down that I wasn't, because I couldn't buy them because I wasn't allowed to for whatever reason, because either I had too much inventory or or my boss was not letting me buy certain things, and that's when I said letting go of things that you can't buy. You have to just get past it.
Yeah, you
can't let it say I'm going to quit unless you let me do this.
Yeah,
unless you don't care about your job.
Yes, that's right.
Your rent. There are stories I turned down that won awards that I thought sucked when I turned them down, and I thought they sucked when they won the award.
Oh, wow. Okay. All
So,
right.
no, so I don't, there are no, I mean, there are no stories I turned down that I regret turning down because I didn't like them. It's because I couldn't take them for whatever reason.
Understood. Alatoric Consonance also asks, what scares you?
Politics.
Okay.
Now, real life. I mean, nothing. Actually, stories don't stick. Reading doesn't usually scare me. In real life does.
Yes.
I say that often, and it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you certainly see some of that reflected in Shirley Jackson's work. So let me see. Crenesi asks, who would you like to see write a horror short story that doesn't normally write horror?
The people who I've gotten already. I mean, I'm not sure there are other people. I mean, I've worked with a lot of writers, either reprint or original, of writers who I didn't think wrote horror.
Yeah.
Who do occasionally. I can't think of anyone offhand.
Okay.
Because if they don't write horror, they don't write horror, and you can't make them write horror.
Yes. Yes.
So either I'm aware of them and they do write horror already, and maybe are not considered horror writers. That's different. Like Don Chown, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he's published 2 horror stories that I adore, and I've reprinted both of them, and I've tried to get him to write. I think I tried to get him to write for the Jackson anthology. I can't remember which one, but he couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are writers who do occasionally write horror who I try to get, and sometimes we can't. Whatever.
Wabi Sabi asks, without naming names, what's your worst experience with a writer while doing an anthology?
Just that they don't pay attention to what I ask them to do.
Yeah.
That's, I love working with the writers. I can't think of a bad experience.
Wow. That's awesome. That's great to hear.
I mean, if I bought this story, I've had writers, when I was in Omni, I've had writers over the years reject my rejections who wrote really nasty notes and respond to a rejection, but that's different.
Yeah.
But no, it's just, annoying when they don't follow directions.
Yeah. Yeah. Develop something that's not what you're asking for.
No, that's not. No, I mean, not paying attention to when I ask for certain edits. Oh, no, that was something else.
Oh, gotcha.
No. Yeah. No, that's the worst experience when I have people not listen to what I'm telling them to do. Yeah. Or late. I mean, or not sending me back edits in time.
Yes.
And I know it's probably, personal stuff going on in their life. So I try to be nice while I nag them.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Let's see, turning to like themes and trends within horror, the horror genre, Socorixis asks, what growing trends have you noticed in the horror, weird, dark literary field in the past few years? And what, if any, aspects of horror do you feel have become less popular that you'd like to see come back?
Well, the thing I've noticed most is the expansion of culture, of writers from different cultures writing in English and submitting work. And I appreciate that a lot. And I'm trying to become more aware of some of those writers. Because, the thing is, once you start publishing someone, they always want to be in your anthologies. Yeah. And it's like, I only have 20 slots and I can't use you in everything.
Yes.
And I do want to use new people. I mean, I would like to get new people into either on magazine I'm editing or an anthology. So I think, to me, that the international aspect of horror is expanding, and I like that a lot. As far as for me, it's the opposite. It's not like, well, what do I see that I want to come back? It's what I can't stand.
Well, I'll take that. I would love to hear about that.
There's things I can't stand. I'm so sick of like certain tropes of, although sometimes they work. I mean, like at one point I said, I hate zombie stories. I never want to see a zombie story.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get brilliant zombie stories.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the trope where the couple are on the outs where nothing's going right. And then they go someplace on vacation and something's out to kill them both.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a very English trope.
Hmm.
But there's still brilliant stories done like
Yeah.
that. It depends on what's going on. But I get really tired of the domesticity. It's like, oh God, I don't care about your stupid arguments. Either get on with the horror and stop being idiots.
Yes.
And getting into trouble because you're idiots. I mean, there's no problem. I'm not talking about just conflict between characters, between a couple or something. But I'm talking about, oh yeah, we're about to get divorced, but let's go on a happy vacation, and and then the guy did something really stupid, like killing the wrong person or thing.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, but that's not. I'm not even sure I could call that a subgenre of horror.
Yeah. Yeah. The bad relationship, bad decisions subgenre.
And the bad place, the house, going to a house that's going to eat you up.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, yes. I mean, on the other hand, in the Jackson anthology, I've got at least one story like that that I love.
Yeah.
It totally depends on the storytelling, on how the story is told. Anything can be made fresh again with the point of view, the action, the characters, and what they do and how they react to what's going on. So nothing, I realize I like a certain kind of story. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Like I like stories that take place in the Arctic or Antarctic.
Interesting.
I mean, I realize I really like to have a story like that in my year's best.
Yes. Yes.
Well, and there are some good ones.
You had that. This was in the best of the best. The story "Better You Believe" by Carol Johnstone.
That's great. That's gorgeous.
And that was a great story to end the anthology on. But that was crazy good because it is a good adventure story, a kind of suspenseful, thrilling story.
And you don't expect. I mean, I think you don't expect the ending. I know I did.
I did not, and it was one of those things that I do love about horror stories is there is some sort of there's like this thrill, this reveal at the end that you should have seen that coming all along. Oh, let me go back now.
And then you reread it.
Now I see the clues you were giving me.
Yeah, I mean, but that's really delicate.
Yes.
I mean, most writers can't. It's very hard to pull that off successfully.
Yeah.
And not screw it, not put in too much. And not, make it obvious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's see. Angry Bread asks, of all the themes you've based anthologies on, is there one you're especially interested in or any you'd like to do that you haven't had a chance to do in terms of themes?
Yeah, lots.
Yeah.
I would like to do another supernatural noir one. I love doing that. I really want to do another one. I'm trying to sell a couple of anthologies now. Then I just finished the monster one. I'd like to do some new ones. The one I talk about that I'll probably never do because no publisher seems interested. The Book of Shoes.
A horror book about shoes?
No, a mixed genre of shoes.
About shoes.
Shoes, horseshoes, boots, foot binding, anything to do with shoes. But I haven't been able to get no publisher really is interested.
Okay.
Maybe some. I mean, I don't care that much, but it would be fun.
There's got to be some angle there,
and even some nonfiction stuff. And I would like to get some mainstream people. I mean, it just seems very wide open for fun.
Yes, I can't think of a single shoe-based anthology. So Angry Bread, I hope that answers your question. That is definitely a good one. Okay, let's close out with a couple of questions, just career advice. Space Ape asks, what advice do you have for people pursuing a career in editing? And what did your career path look like? We've talked about your career some, but if you had any additional thoughts on that about your own career, I'd love to hear that. But specifically, career in editing.
Well, the problem with my career is that I was starting in the 70s. So my career path is like no one else's, and it's not going to be like anyone else's now.
Yeah.
So I can only give limited advice, but it would not hurt to be a reader for a slush pile. for volunteer for magazine. If you want to do short fiction editing, there aren't that many positions open. Some people start their own magazines to do that. But it's really hard to get a foot in the door because there just aren't that many jobs,
Yes.
So this person, were they talking about short fiction or novels? Did they say? No,
they don't say, but I would assume short fiction since within the context of an anthology discussion.
Yeah, well, read a lot. They said read. See if you can, even if you just volunteer or get paid very little. See if you can read for a magazine or a webzine that accepts slush and that may need a reader.
Yes.
I mean, that's the start. Other than that, it's really hard for me to say. I mean,
and what is for those who are just not familiar with the industry, what is the job of the slush reader?
Oh, you read everything that comes in that's not by a writer who you might have heard of, or from an agent, although short fiction doesn't usually come from an agent. So it's anything that comes. It used to be called over the transom. A transom used to be, I had in my old apartment actually still a glass thing that would open and then people threw the manuscripts through the top. I think.
Like a pneumatic tube?
No, a window.
Oh, a window, gotcha.
Door, okay. Yeah. And I had those in my old apartment, except they were glued shut. They was pasted shut from paint,
Yes.
And I believe that was over the transom, they were called. And I don't know why. I know why. I mean, I don't know when it started being called slush pile or slush.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that comes in that you don't expect to be any good because it's not from anyone who's been published, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it gives you a good feel for what's out there. And it can give you a good feel for what mistakes people make. And it can, you can soon say, this is really good, even though it's in slush. This is really interesting.
Yes.
So that's one way to get to do that. And I mean, when I was in book publishing, I read freelance for some book publishers in the genre, and also for 20th Century Fox. I would do readers' reports for manuscripts, but I don't even think they have that job anymore. I'm for Book of the Month Club, Science Fiction Book Club. I would do freelance work reading for them and getting like $25 a manuscript to write up, like whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know if those jobs even exist anymore. That's why it's like, I'm not the person to ask because as I said, I was starting in mid 75.
Yes. Yes.
And God knows what it's like now.
Yeah. And publishing's just changed so much.
And I mean, there's more of it, because of, online and websites, but I don't know if those venues use readers or I don't know if they use readers, and I don't know if they hire people, to do stuff. I mean, like when I worked in a company, when I worked for Omni, I had an assistant who would read slush and who would do other things that I didn't want to do, the photocopy, like that.
Yes.
But working at home, someone once in a while, someone said, "Oh, can I be your assistant? Can I be your intern?" I said, "No, I don't want you here in my apartment." It's like, no, I do not want you here. What I need someone to do is do my spreadsheets for paying out royalties. And I don't trust anyone to say, some people still require checks, not too many. Agents do, states do. But it's like, do I trust someone to use my PayPal account to pay people? I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you.
So it's different. It's like now that, small presses work from home. What I can say is wherever, depending on where you live, if there's a press near you, a publishing house, small one or not, if you wanted to get into book publishing, ask them if they need helper, if they need someone to help out, assistance. Locus, if you're near California, and proofread, copy edit. That's how you get your foot in the door. Whether it'll get you any place, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's the start, and the thing is you have to, when you do copy editing or proofread, you have to pass a test to do that.
Yes.
Proof test or copy edit. And that's one way to get a foot. That was one way to get a foot in the door. I don't know if it still is.
Well, for everyone who wants to write horror and get published, what are one or two rookie mistakes to avoid? And what's maybe one thing that the writer absolutely should do?
What should they avoid? Don't DM editors.
Okay, don't direct message your editors. Yes.
Oh, oh, put your contact info on your website. I am sick of looking on blogs and websites and not finding any contact info from a writer or any more publisher. I mean, when I've got to see magazines and that's like, yes, even if you do this stupid form, but have something, it's like really, if you want to sell your work, let people know where they can reach you.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Make it easy to contact you. Yeah.
Because if I can't reach someone, if it makes it hard, they're not going to bother. It's like, maybe I'll go through Facebook and then DM them or Twitter and see, I'll do that with people I don't know, with writers who are better known maybe, and see if if I can't contact them, I can't reach them for some reason. Writers who I'm not friends with or don't know, work with, I may try, as a last resort, I may contact them on their Twitter and just in their feed say, I'm trying to reach you, please email me.
Wow.
Or nice. Here, or DM me, please. If that's usually if I want to use the story for a reprint or something.
Yes.
But anyway, every writer should have have contact information on someplace. You don't have it. Everyone, I guess, needs, if not a website, a blog, but on a lot of blogs don't have contact information. I don't know why.
I think people are afraid of like getting spammed or something, like putting a phone number down, but an email address even.
Well, then do a form. On my website, I have a form. It comes, I get emails through my form and they get to me and I can do what I want with them.
Yes.
It's like, well, how are you going to get published if people can't reach you?
Yeah.
If someone wants to buy your story, how are they going to do that if they don't know where to find you?
Yes. Okay, so some good practical advice from the Empress of horror fiction herself, Ellen Datlow. This has been a blast talking to you. A lot of good practical advice and just interesting background on that process of delivering horror fiction to people who love those stories. So we are, remember everybody, on September 28th, my fancy titles here, September 28th, is the street date for When Things Get Dark, stories inspired by.
And I'm doing there's going to be a reading, a virtual reading on September 21st.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where was that? Where
it's on the same, it's where we do KGB. Online.
Yeah.
It's through StreamYard and a YouTube channel.
Yeah. The Fantastic Fiction channel.
Yeah. I think it's that channel that Matt's going to be hosting with me or helping me. We have about 8 people going to be reading. I forget who. But a bunch of people are going to be reading from the book.
Well, and if you're not already doing so, follow Ellen Datlow at Ellen Datlow on Twitter, so that you can find out things like that special reading event on September 21. Right. You can also find her at datlow.com, and there's a good biography and list of books that she's worked on.
Which is never up to date.
Yeah, I don't know how you stay up to date on that.
But also Facebook, even if I don't friend you, you can see my posts are always universal.
Yes.
So I have mentioned the 21st event, and I will mention it again.
Very good. Thank you. And so what else do you have besides When Things Get Dark and that reading? What else do you have coming up? You've mentioned Screams from the Dark.
Well, that won't be 22.
Yeah.
That'll be coming out next summer, spring or summer.
Spring or summer. Okay. So Screams in the Dark, or Screams.
Body Shocks, Screams from the Dark. From the Dark.
Thank you. And then you've got the body horror anthology coming up.
Yes, that's called Body Shocks. It's coming out from Tachyon October 19th, I believe.
Okay, very good.
And had a fabulous review from Locus.
Nice.
Really pleased by Gabina Iglesias.
Couple of authors that we would know who are in the Body Shocks volume.
Oh, I can't remember. Oh God, I don't have a. Let's see. I have to find my table of content.
That's fine. You're working on some of the books.
Sandra Paw, Angela Slatter, Lisa Hannett, Karen Warren. A lot of guys, but I can't remember. Ed Bryant, but he's dead. So some is Michael Blumline. Sorry, Richard Kristen Matheson. Who else? Lucy Taylor.
So good list of that. And you said that was October 12th, is that right?
I think it's October 19th is
October
coming
19th. Okay, very good. So be on the lookout for that. Any other anthologies we should be watching or collections we should be looking for?
My best horror number 413 will be coming out this year in October.
Very good.
Sorry, November or December.
Mhm.
And that's it, except for the monster one.
Yes, yes,
I don't anything that's one, and hopefully continuing the best of the year.
yes.
But I'm hoping to be selling a couple, but I don't know if I will.
Okay, very good. Very good. Well, thank you, Ellen. And also for next episode of Chthonica, we've got Paul Tremblay coming up.
Oh, cool. Say hi, Paul.
I will. We're doing a kind of a fun series where I'm asking some contemporary horror writers about stories by other horror writers that have made a big impact on them.
Cool.
John Langan talked about Kelly Link, actually. He got me to go out and read through a couple of Kelly Link stories, and I read a bunch of them after I read those two. But we talked about just other horror writers who made a big impact on them. So I'm going to talk to Paul in a couple of weeks about that and post that. So yeah.
I assume you read her story When Things Get Dark. Yeah.
Kelly's.
Skindler's Veil.
Oh yeah, Skindler's Veil is freaky. It's very. I haven't read enough of Shirley Jackson stories to say, oh, it's just like this Shirley Jackson story, but it's very much a Kelly Link story.
Well, what's interesting is Liz Hand thought it was very much like a John Crowley story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's very she does this thing with recursive. It's like metafiction. It's like recursive fiction. You drill down the story within the story within the story, kind of like
and she
that
always
movie
comes
Inception.
out the other end. I mean, she has done amazing structural stuff in some of her stories, and they always work out.
Yes. The story Magic for Beginners is just like the king of all of that. It's or the queen of all of that. Those kinds of stories. It's pretty stunning. John Langan and I talked about that on the previous Chthonica episode. It's a pretty astounding work. I like to drill down kind of deep into just a couple of stories that some of our favorite, top of the genre writers have been impacted by or influenced by. So that's it. So anyway, well, thank you, Ellen, so much. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you. I've had a pleasure.